My fellow Foxfire members, I'm Bill Cornetta and have the privilege to serve as president of your board of directors. Foxfire's governing documents date back to the mid-1980s. The last revision was in 2007. Over a year ago, your board determined that an update was in order to ensure compliance with Florida Statute 720, which covers homeowners associations, to make provision for electronic voting in the future, to ensure that our governing documents reflected how we actually operate, and to bring our documents in line with current standards of modern homeowners associations. To accomplish these goals, an ad hoc committee was formed consisting of Chris Jackstadt as chairperson, board members John Houck and Mark Schwab, along with Donald Shea and Pam Cannon. Over the last year, this ad hoc committee and every individual board member became involved in the review process. We met with Foxfire attorney Steve Falk and reviewed the documents line by line. Input was sought as appropriate from other committee chairpersons, especially the Finance Committee. At a regular board meeting on May 18th, the final version of the revised documents was approved by the board for submission to the members for review, comment, and ultimately a vote. The majority of these documents are either unchanged or the changes are required by statute. Provisions related to voting thresholds, discretionary board spending, annual assessments, and limits on the total of all special assessments due in any fiscal year will be of major interest to members. The rationale for these changes will be addressed later in this presentation and in subsequent communications. Effective leadership has been defined as making hard choices among competing options with incomplete information. I believe your board has made hard choices in good faith. You, the members, will now have to make a judgment based on assessing competing claims and the source of those claims. You'll have to judge the rationale, intent, and prudence of the changes being proposed. The results of your assessment and vote will determine the outcome for these proposed revisions. I ask you to keep in mind that historically, Foxfire boards have been prudent stewards of member resources. They have always shown restraint when it comes to assessments and spending. Your current board is no different. My fellow board members will explain the details of the proposed changes during this presentation. This information will give you the ability to critically analyze different components of these revisions. You will then be asked to exercise your right to an informed vote. Thank you for taking the time to review this important presentation. Next, you'll hear from our Board Vice President, Tappy Phillips.
Thank you, Bill. It has been an honor to serve on the Foxfire Board, and I'm happy to be starting my second three-year term. During the past year, the board has reviewed revisions to the governing documents. We have to stay in compliance with state law, and we need to update them to reflect the reality here. We recognize that votes on significant improvements have failed in the past. A major factor in these failures was the number of members who did not vote. The revised documents let major decisions be made by a majority of the actual votes cast. So that decisions are not made by only a few, we would need at least 366 yes votes. This is based on the number of members who have voted in the past. This measure would also encourage members to vote. Sitting on the sidelines would no longer be a useful option, and our future would be determined by those who care enough to be informed and involved. It is important for Foxfire to stay up to date. This is the duty and responsibility of the board and every member of our community, for ourselves, our neighbors, and those who live here in the future. So please vote yes to approve these documents. Let's get this done. Next, Treasurer Roger Saunders and new board member Jim Moore.
Thank you, Tappy. I'm Roger Saunders, and I'm here with Jim Moore. We're both members of Foxfire's Board of Directors. We're going to be discussing the proposed changes to Foxfire's governing documents and why we think it is important that the members of the Foxfire community approve these changes. First, just a little bit about us. My background is in the business world, with 48 years of experiences with companies in the Fortune 200, leading privately held communication companies, entrepreneurial ownership stakes at restaurant franchises, the data market technology business, as well as a manufacturing concern. That work stemmed from startups to extremely well-established firms, all of which successfully shifted through the ebbs and flows of growth, pauses in the economy, turnaround status, and reinvention of operations. Jim's background is in law. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Roger. Yes, I'm an attorney licensed in Wisconsin. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1972 and practiced for 44 years in Wisconsin, first with a very large firm and then with my own firm in a smaller community in Wisconsin. I was mostly a trial lawyer or litigator doing civil litigation, but I also did a fair amount of real estate work and writing a lot of contracts and documents, especially real estate documents of the type we're going to talk about here. You know, Roger, I sometimes worry that when we talk to the members about the documents that are being revised, people's eyes tend to glaze over and they're not entirely sure what we're talking about. So I thought I would try and explain the three documents that are at issue here, I hope in somewhat layman's terms, because they're pretty dense and pretty heavily legally written. So the first one we're going to be talking about is what's called the Articles of Incorporation. And that is simply the paperwork that is necessary to start a corporation. We are here at Foxfire a non-stock, non-profit corporation known as the Foxfire Community Association of Collier County Incorporated. And we're all members of that corporation. In order to get a separate entity, legal entity like a corporation started, it's necessary to file certain paperwork with the Secretary of State here in Florida, which has been done. I think there are some minor or technical changes being made to the Articles of Incorporation for us, but nothing substantive and nothing to be concerned about, in my opinion. The next document, however, is a little more substantive and involves members' interests, and that's what's called the Declaration of Covenants. Now, a Declaration of Covenants is a document that is drawn up in very dense legal language and recorded with the Register of Deeds in the county where property is located. And the purpose of that declaration is to affect land and real estate on the land. It governs how the land and the real estate or the buildings on the land are used and may be used. And the Declaration of Covenants was first recorded at the time Foxfire was developed. The developer recorded it, and it is a standard document that accompanies virtually every planned bundled community like Foxfire. It lays out the different things that can and cannot be done with the land. And because it's recorded with the Register of Deeds, it automatically becomes part of every transfer of property here at Foxfire. It is a normal and frankly recommended way of governing the development and use of land. So those are the Declaration of Covenants. Those are going to be modified by some of the proposals here. The last document is what's known as the bylaws. And the bylaws are an ordinary and necessary part of virtually every corporation here in the state of Florida. Bylaws are required by Florida law, and they set forth the rules and procedures for a corporation running itself. How votes are conducted, who can vote, how members are disciplined, anything like that. Those kinds of rules are in the bylaws, and they are as tightly and densely written as the Declaration of Covenants are. These are documents that lawyers write and rewrite, and ours have been in existence since the beginning of Foxfire. We're not creating anything new here. We're just making some minor changes to them. Roger, I know these three documents and the changes to the three documents have been discussed by the board for a long time, well before I came on the board. But since you've been on the board longer than I have, why don't you give our members some history on these changes and how the board planned for those changes?
Jim, as Dr. Cornetta has mentioned, Foxfire's original documents date back to 1984, with revisions in 1992 and 2007. Since 1984, Florida's population has grown from 11 million people to over 21.5 million in 2019. By the time the 2020 census is completed, that figure should be over 23 million people. Collier County has quintupled during that time, and a seasonal and tourist population has stayed with that pace of growth. New, updated laws were created out of necessity for Florida. The Florida Homeowners Association Act, or Florida HAA Act, was crafted in the late 70s and has been updated each decade since. The Foxfire Board in 2018, prior to John Houck, Mark Schwab, and I joining the board, began discussions of the importance of updating Foxfire's covenants and bylaws as the Florida HAA laws had been amended and revised in 2017. The previous board voted in January 2019 to begin the review process of documents in coordination with Foxfire's attorney, Steve Falk. With 3 new board members added in February 2019, the Board of 7 began discussing and reviewing needs, verbiage, and items that would need to be amended or revised. John and Mark, as board liaisons to statutory and rules committees, met and discussed the new documents with Chris Jackstedt, a Foxfire member and an attorney, as well as Steve Falk, Donald Shea, and Pam Cannon starting in April 2019. Board meetings and special board meetings limited to just the amended and revised documents were held in May, June, August, and October of 2019, and again in 2020 as document items that held meaning for Foxfire membership. Documents were reviewed on a line-by-line basis, Jim. Jim, could you explain why these changes are important to the Foxfire community?
Thanks, Roger. You ask why these changes are important to Foxfire members. Well, they're important to any members of any organization. Society changes, society evolves, and the law tries to stay with it. The law is not a static item, but it changes and conforms to new issues as they arise in society. I am frankly a little surprised that in the 36-year history of Foxfire, we've only amended these bylaws twice, because there have been a lot of changes in society, and especially in Florida over those 36 years. Florida has some of the most advanced and well-developed law in the country on homeowners associations and bundled communities like ours, because there are so many of them in Florida. And it's a very well-developed but ever-changing body of law. And many of the changes that the board is recommending that the members approve are changes to comply and to correspond to changes in Florida law. Perhaps the best example of that is the emergence of the internet since Foxfire was founded in 1984, and the internet wasn't even dreamt of back then, but it is now, and it's so much a part of our lives. And along with that, gives residents of Foxfire, if they approve this, the opportunity, if they want, to vote online. We do a lot of things online. We bank online. Some states allow online voting. That is very much a part of our life in the 21st century. And now Florida law authorizes online voting, and the bylaw changes are not compelling online voting. They're only giving members the opportunity, if they choose, to vote online. If members are interested, they can find this change, which complies with Florida law, at paragraph 3.5.1 of the bylaws, beginning at line 221. That's where the new provision on voluntary online voting is contained. Roger, perhaps you can explain some of the other reasons the board wants to make online voting available to our members.
Jim, that's a great explanation for we lay people. Beyond the $40,000 plus that Foxfire spends on collating, handling, mailing, and postage costs when we have projects such as this, Foxfire, like every corporation in the country, has to step deeper into the technology-driven world we live in. Many, as you've already pointed out, perhaps most of our members currently pay bills online or via automatic payments. We spend time on our smartphones, tablets, laptop, and desktop computers, as well as social networks, and we do it in order to save time, to save money, to communicate more efficiently, to purchase items. These devices help our Foxfire operations as well to become more efficient and effective. Today, my 5 and 7-year-old granddaughters text and share messaging with me on computers each day. And my 94-year-old mother, who lives here in Foxfire, is active on Instagram, texting, Facebook messaging, and her smartphone and iPad. Think about it, Jim. 10 years ago, our members reported their golf scores to the pro shop. Today, they manage their own handicap via their smartphones or at terminals in the clubhouse. Foxfire members are smart, and they want to and have become more technologically savvy each and every year. Jim, another change that will benefit members is the method of approving voting margins on special assessments. Can you explain why this is so important?
Thank you, Roger. I just finished a campaign for the board, and one of the issues that came up most frequently when I talked to the members as I was in my process of running for this position is the question of why we have a voting system where people that don't vote are treated as a no vote. And most of the people I talked to wanted to change that. And if you think about it, it really isn't a democratic way of doing things. In every other election that people vote in, whether it's from the president down to the local school board referendum, a simple majority of those who vote is sufficient to elect someone or to pass a referendum. That's just the way it's done in the United States. And in fact, at Foxfire, that's the way it's done on most every vote we take. It's a simple majority of people who take the time and interest to vote. There's a difference, though, in the case of votes required for special assessments. And in that case, the current bylaws say that a majority of voting units or a majority of owners has to approve a special assessment. And that would be fine and good if all the unit owners voted, but they don't all vote. In any typical election, about 200 people don't vote here at Foxfire. And because the vote required is a majority of unit owners, for anything to pass here at Foxfire, it has to acquire 466 votes, which is one more than 1/2 of the total number of units here at Foxfire, or 931. And the effect of that rule is that people who don't vote are automatically not voting in favor of it, and therefore they are registered as a no vote. Most people I talked to said it should be decided by a majority of those who take the time and interest to vote on a special assessment. That's where the bylaw change started. And the bylaw change could have been written in that way as every other vote we take in this country and every other vote we take at Foxfire, namely a majority of those who choose to vote is sufficient to pass a special assessment. But the people who were making the bylaw change wanted to add another safeguard, because some people I know are concerned that there might be a significant minority of people who could pass something that a lot of people didn't care for. So they built into this bylaw change kind of a base number that has to be achieved, and that number is 366. In other words, if a vote is taken and a majority approve a special assessment, but the majority is not 366 votes, which it could very well be, that will not pass. There has to be a majority of those who vote, but it has to be at least 366 people. Where did that number come from? Well, if we consider 931 voting units here in Foxfire, 200 that typically don't vote, that goes down to 731 people who typically do vote, and 366 is just 1/2 of that. So there's a guarantee or a safeguard for people who are a little concerned that maybe majorities might run away with things that the vast number of people down here don't approve. So we've built into it, not only is it a majority that will control in the case of a special assessment, just like every other vote in this country, but it has to be at least 366. And that's kind of a built-in safeguard to ensure that we achieve some sort of a super majority in the case of special assessments. And that's for the benefit and the protection of all the members here at Foxfire. And by the way, if members are interested in reading the language that we're talking about here that changes the majority vote in special assessment cases, they can find it in two places. First, they can find it in the Declaration of Covenants at paragraph 2.2, beginning at line 153, or they can find it, because the change is exactly the same, it's also in the bylaws at section 6.6, beginning at line 726. So if anyone is interested in reading the exact language to confirm what I just said, that's where you can find it. Roger, one other change that I know is of interest to our members is the change to spending limits by the Board of Directors. I know we've always had spending limits on the Board of Directors in the bylaws ever since the bylaws have been established, but this revision keeps those spending limits, just makes a modest increase to them. Now, perhaps you could discuss why this modest increase is going to benefit Foxfire in the future.
Jim, very appropriately, Foxfire bylaws and covenants establish spending limitations on the Board of Directors. What we're really talking about here are two changes to board spending. The first change deals with increases in annual assessments. Under the current bylaws, the board may not increase annual assessments, or dues if you want to call them that, more than 6% of the gross revenue budget. The change proposed in the bylaw revisions would raise that limit from 6% to 6.5%, principally to keep pace with inflation. These changes can be found at paragraph 6.5 of the bylaw revisions. The second change to board spending is the authority that the board has to pay for unusual, unexpected, unbudgeted, or non-recurring expenses. Presently, the board has the authority to spend up to 5% of the budget for those unusual expenses. The change to the bylaws would increase that also to 6.5%. Again, this authority is only for unusual, unexpected, unbudgeted, or non-recurring expenses that the board deems necessary, and the modest increase of 1.5% is really necessary to keep up with inflation. For example, if an air conditioning unit fails and needs to be replaced, this would give the board that spending authority to the new limit. The board has a duty under Florida law to make sure Foxfire property is properly maintained and facilities properly managed. This authority is for that purpose, and the increase is consistent with the increased cost of keeping our property properly maintained. This change can be found in section 6.6 of the bylaw revisions. Jim, these revisions provide future boards, importantly, it provides future boards the flexibility to make modest changes in annual assessment charges without consuming the time and expense of reaching out to members for a vote. In addition, it codifies that a majority of voting interests present in person or by proxy and voting at any annual or special members meeting at which a quorum has been attained, provided that at least 366 voting interests must vote in favor. Now, each member of this board, as well as previous board members at Foxfire, clearly understand that the board has a duty to ensure that Foxfire is properly maintained and improved when it's needed, and to protect the members and their investments. Boards adhere to governing documents. In 36 years, Foxfire boards have amended and revised covenants and bylaws just 2 times. It is essential that we members in 2020 do not hamstring future boards in fulfilling their fiduciary duties and responsibilities. The proposed changes in terms of annual assessments and special assessments to 6.5% from the current 6% and 5% levels hardly even keep up with the cost of living. Board members in the past today and in the future, will be required by Florida law to do their best to protect members and their investments and to act in Foxfire's best interest. They are guided by that responsibility, by their common sense, by Florida law, and we can be recalled if we fail to do so. Now, each of the current board members, Jim, are encouraging our members to read these amended and revised bylaws and covenants. We all recognize that there may be a hot spot or an area of concern for a few members. That is why we have pointed out some very specific paragraphs within the documents. If you have added questions or are seeking greater clarification, please raise those questions and/or comments via the links that will be provided to you. Please state your name and Foxfire number. We want all members to be able to see your questions and your comments, as you will perhaps spark added questions from fellow members.
Thanks, Roger, for that explanation. It was great. Some people have suggested within the community that the board is doing something improper here or underhanded in a way, and I'm sorry to hear that, because the board is not acting out of self-interest here at all. Certainly nobody on the board is profiting by this. We're all going to be subject to the same restrictions and impositions that everyone else is. The board is doing this because we have a series of obligations that we have to fulfill, and it won't be just this board, but it's all the boards down the road from here. All of these boards have to make sure that Foxfire is well maintained, that it's up to date, and it's attractive, not only to our members, but to anyone who wants to buy into Foxfire. That's our responsibility, and that's why we're proposing many of these changes. As your current board of directors, and as Roger has said, we have discussed these amendments and revisions in great detail. We've sought legal counsel to make sure that they're all lawful and proper, and we have made the determination that they're necessary to go forward to ensure the best future for Foxfire and its residents. We, as a board of directors, urge you to support our work, and we ask you to read these changes and vote for the proposed changes to our governing documents. Do it, please, to guarantee Foxfire's future as we move into the 21st century. Finally, I know Roger joins with me in thanking all of you for taking the time to listen to us and to learn what we're trying to do to better the Foxfire community. Your involvement is appreciated and very necessary to our community. We hope that we've made things a little clearer for you. Thank you for caring about Foxfire.
And thanks, Jim, for joining us this morning to pass this through to all of our members. We're interested in their comments and feedback. These are important. We need to take care of them.
And now you'll be hearing from another member of our board of directors, Sherry Straka.
Thank you, Jim. As your representative on the board, my obligation is to act on matters which empower each one of you to have a seat at the table via your vote. Transparency has always been at the forefront of my priorities when representing our membership. Each owner has the right to vote, and if you choose not to vote, you will be giving up your voice to the proposed changes at Foxfire, and the vote may impact you financially. I would encourage each of you to be heard through your vote. For the past 12 months, I and my fellow board members have worked diligently under the guidance of our attorney, Stephen Falk, to review and revise Foxfire's documents to comply with Florida statutes and create governing documents which are in the best interest of our Foxfire members. Now, you will be hearing from my fellow board member, John Hawk.
Thank you, Sherry. It is not only my responsibility as your elected board member, but also as a member to see that Foxfire stays current and consistent with the Florida laws and statutes that govern our association. Foxfire's lawyer indicated the purpose of the new governing documents is threefold: that the governing documents are consistent with Florida law and statutes, provides for policy decisions the board endorses. Ultimately, the decision is in the hands of our members. The adoption of the new governing documents falls to the members. Members need to understand how the new documents differ from the current documents and decide if the changes benefit them or not. Please exercise your right to vote. Every vote counts.
In closing, we hope this presentation has given you additional insight into the proposed changes and the information necessary to cast an informed vote. Should you have questions or comments regarding the information detailed in this presentation, please email us at foxfire@foxfirecc.com. Your vote is your voice. Have your voice heard. The best member is an educated member. We thank you.